Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi Zhi. Coming up in this edition, the humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of the Congo remains dire despite the ceasefire announced earlier this week, and the UN is making a special appeal for peace. Hamas is calling on the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to convene emergency sessions to address US President Donald Trump's threats to relocate Palestinians from Gaza. And the first group of illegal migrants from the United States has arrived at a detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. We begin with Africa. The M23 rebels in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have continued their advances in the eastern part of the country, despite the ceasefire they announced earlier this week. The humanitarian crisis in the country remains dire. The United Nations says more than 160 female prisoners were raped and burned to death during a jailbreak in the eastern city of Goma. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is appealing for mediation. Jody Jacobs reports.
According to the latest United Nations estimates, nearly 3,000 people have been killed in Goma, a city in the eastern part of the country. Goma was captured by M23 rebels, plunging the city into chaos. The rebels then headed south towards the capital of South Kivu province, leaving thousands dead. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has called for the fighting to end.
Silence the guns. Stop the escalation. Respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Uphold international human rights law and international humanitarian law. There is no military solution.
The DRC has been experiencing decades of violence driven mostly over the access to land and mineral resources. Antonio Guterres says it's time for mediation, adding that the time has also come for peace. The Secretary-General says his office has received reports of countless human rights abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence, forced recruitment, and the displacement of life-saving aid.
We also see the continuous threats by other armed groups, either Congolese or foreign. All of this is having an enormous human toll. We have countless reports of human rights abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence, forced recruitment, and the disruption of life-saving aid. The humanitarian situation in and around Goma is perilous.
The Secretary-General will join regional leaders in Addis Ababa next week to discuss the crisis with the hope of a mediated settlement. Meanwhile, representatives from the DRC are expected to present a motion to the UN Human Rights Council seeking an investigation into what it calls mass violations in Goma. An emergency meeting of that council has been scheduled in Geneva.
That was Jody Jacobs on the UN's special appeal for peace in the DRC. The situation in Goma is showing no signs of improving after rebels captured the city more than a week ago. The fight has forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to leave the capital of North Kivu province. Robert Nagila reports.
The camp is scattered for several kilometers on either side of the road to Sake. Many of the displaced have no idea when or if they'll ever return to their homes. The UN estimates at least 400,000 people were displaced by the fighting in North and South Kivu in January alone. A further 700,000 were displaced in Goma by February 3rd. Early this week, the M23 declared a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons, although there have been reports of renewed fighting. But with Goma International Airport still closed, hardly any aid is getting through to the city and its outskirts. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with many experiencing a shortage of medical supplies.
What we can tell you is that for more than a week, we have been facing several cases of mass casualties. We are receiving injured people from all over, and we have treated more than 1,000 wounded at this hospital.
Along the road between Sake and Goma, there are still people on the move. Most of them, like Salome Magaga, live in the camps around Magunga but make the daily trek in search of food.
I went back to my farm to get food for my children.
Others make the daily trip to repair their homes damaged in the recent fighting.
You see, I have a machete. I'm from Sake, and I went there to repair my house so that I can move from the camp back home.
For the moment, there is very little assistance getting to those who need it most. A lot is now riding on this weekend's joint summit between the Southern African Development Community and the East African Community in Tanzania. The outcome may very well determine if peace will prevail or there'll be a renewed round of fighting.
That was Robert Nagila reporting. Turning to the Middle East, Hamas is calling on the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to convene emergency sessions to address U.S. President Donald Trump's threats to relocate Palestinians from Gaza. The group is urging a strong, unified stance against the plans. Rami Almagari has this report.
Yes, the feeling in Gaza is the feel of outrage and disappointment, widespread disappointment across the Gaza Strip, whether at a level of the population, level of leadership, of the Hamas, of the factions, and everyone here is disappointed and outraged out of these remarks that seem to be on the side of Israel, that has been carrying out a very devastating war against the Gaza Strip in a way that would allow Israel to succumb the Palestinian factions, to make them succumb, particularly the Islamist Hamas party. Actually, the population, away from the political factions, away from the political side, the Palestinian population, majority of them, are against the idea of evicting them from Gaza, and all of them are steadfasting. We have spoken to several people about the reactions, and majority of them have expressed this feeling of resentment out of Trump's remarks, and some of them actually told us that instead of evicting the Palestinians, Trump should have the Israelis back to the countries they came from several decades ago, like France, Germany, and other countries. That's the feeling. The mood of the people is totally against the idea of evicting them. And even I can say that those who have returned from displacement shelters in the south of the territory are now repairing the damaged homes that they had during the war and trying to get by and have a living even amidst the rubble or over the rubble in their homes because of the Israeli war. This is something that is totally rejected.
That was Rami Almagari in Gaza. Countries worldwide have condemned Trump's plan to take over Gaza and move its population. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the proposal is worth listening to. Israel has even ordered its army to prepare for Palestinians to leave the enclave. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
Opposition leaders are welcoming the meeting, welcoming the friendly approach by the United States, trying not to touch this very hot potato, leaving it aside. How realistic is this plan? What are the chances of this plan happening? No one really knows. But here is something we do know. In less than a month, the ceasefire in Gaza has to go from stage 1 into stage 2. Bezalel Smotrich already said that his party will join Itamar Ben-Gvir, who already left the coalition, and they will leave as well if the second stage goes into effect. Now, it's a very big question if Smotrich will really do it, because let's assume that the second stage goes into effect. Smotrich could perhaps tell his voters, how could we leave a government now when all our dreams are just about to be realized, when Gaza will be finally empty from Palestinians, as their party has been wishing for so many years? That is something that will be interesting to see. So these are the two differences between the far-right parties and all the rest of them. The far-right is celebrating this. The other parties, the opposition, even the Orthodox parties are congratulating Donald Trump for his very friendly Israeli approach, but trying to leave this Gaza issue aside, understanding that it's not that simple. The fact that there was a statement in Washington doesn't mean that this will happen tomorrow morning or any time after that.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Moving to the Americas. Uproar over U.S. President Donald Trump's moves since taking office continues, and this time about his plan to radically cut more than 2 million jobs in the federal government. A district court judge in Boston has temporarily blocked the plan. The White House says more than 60,000 employees have already accepted the offer. But the labor unions warn that Trump's plan, spearheaded by billionaire Elon Musk, lacks authority and funds. Nick Harper reports from Washington, D.C.
The White House has called it a rare, generous offer. The White House is aiming for a target of about 5 to 10% for these voluntary redundancies. Now, they're looking to cut government waste, but there are significant questions as to who will fill what are, in theory, fundamental government roles. And unions are telling workers that they should not take up this offer. They're questioning the legality of it, and they're also questioning whether the administration will come through on its promises. There is a court hearing. A lawsuit has been brought against the Trump administration for this, calling it arbitrary, unlawful, and a short-fused ultimatum. This lawsuit trying to push back that deadline to give workers more time to consider it. But of course, the union saying, look, don't take up this offer. It's a risky bet.
That was Nick Harper on controversies surrounding U.S. President Donald Trump's moves to cut federal jobs. The first group of illegal migrants from the United States has arrived at a detention facility in Guantanamo Bay. It's part of President Donald Trump's plan to deport up to 30,000 migrants to the U.S. naval base in Cuba, a move rejected by Cuban authorities. Luis Chirino reports.
10 illegal migrants arrived at the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, aboard a U.S. military plane. The Defense Department said the detained migrants were high-threat individuals with criminal records. The action follows the decision by U.S. President Donald Trump to prepare the military base to house potentially tens of thousands of migrants. The Guantanamo Bay facility has previously been used as a prison for alleged Taliban terrorists linked to the September 11, 2001 attacks, and in 1994 to house Cuban rafters intercepted at sea trying to make it to the U.S. The U.S. Defense Department says the detention is a temporary measure, with the Defense Secretary calling it a perfect place. Cuban authorities say the move is an act of brutality. The Cuban government claims the U.S. decision to deport migrants to Guantanamo is irresponsible and could risk the stability and peace in the military base and its surroundings.
That was Luis Chirino reporting from Havana. The threat of U.S. tariffs has prompted Canada to explore new markets. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will host a meeting with business leaders on Friday to discuss ways to diversify trade and boost the economy. Although the new U.S. tariffs are on a 30-day pause, businesses are still looking for alternatives. Dan Williams reports.
As products go, this is synonymous with Canada. The Jatemans family have been making maple syrup and other maple products for generations.
We started in 1876 by my great-great-great-grandparents.
And it is big business. Canada exports more than $600 million worth of maple products yearly.
51% of all of the maple syrup in Canada that's made goes to the United States, so it's our critical market for Canada.
But U.S. tariffs could disrupt that. Since taking office, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened a 25% tariff on Canadian exports, while suggesting that Canada could become America's 51st state.
It's a big deal to have tariffs on our products. It's going to definitely affect revenues for the entire industry, and we need the support of our domestic market to get through this.
But events in the last few weeks have provoked defiance north of the border. Although the threat of US tariffs has been paused for now, that hasn't stopped a surge in Canadian patriotism. That sentiment is shared by Canadians across the US, with a movement for shoppers to check labels in supermarkets to see if they're from Canada.
I think it's made Canadians across nationally more aware of what is going on and becoming I think more educated about the situation and what role we all have to play as Canadians.
I hope that this sort of brings us together. It's making people at least look at the things they're buying and not being so complacent.
But the rift doesn't stop there. Many Canadians are also pausing on booking holidays in the US.
Tourism is all about image. Like, if you're going to go somewhere, you're going to go somewhere where you feel good about going to that place.
Wayne Smith is a professor at the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Oh, there's definitely going to be a fallout. We're already starting to see the numbers. The numbers of Canadians traveling to the U.S. has dropped precipitously. We're starting to see a real decrease, especially in the pleasure market.
It's a sticky situation for maple syrup producers and other Canadian industries. Many Canadians are hoping to end this dispute before the economy takes a big hit.
That was Dan Williams on Canada's efforts to explore new markets under the threat of U.S. tariffs. Meanwhile, Mexico has made moves to shore up its trade ties with other countries in the face of Donald Trump's tariff threats. The U.S.'s biggest trading partner has already signed agreements with Asian countries. President Claudia Sheinbaum also hopes to modernize its trade pact with the European Union. Frank Contreras has more details.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has deployed thousands of National Guard troops to Mexico's border with the United States. It's an effort to avoid U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats. The United States is still by far Mexico's top trading partner. In January, weeks before Sheinbaum negotiated a month-long delay in Trump's plan to impose 25% tariffs on all goods coming from Mexico, the European Union unveiled a plan to update its trade pact with Mexico. The new agreement would strengthen environmental protections, increase Europe's agricultural exports to Mexico, and provide more benefits for small businesses from both Europe and Mexico doing business across the Atlantic.
There has been progress in the dialogue regarding the trade agreement with Europe. One of the most important advances is that the energy chapter was removed, which is very important for us due to sovereignty. And work continues, but there is still no agreement.
Since 2018, Mexico has taken steps to protect its entire energy sector, including petroleum, citing a new priority for energy sovereignty. Brussels says Mexican electronic assembly and manufacturing would increase under the new agreement with the European Union.
Next, sir, this is
Still, Mexico is carefully advancing with its new European trade pact so as not to upset delicate negotiations with President Trump.
We have the right to do that.
Economists here say the Mexican government is taking a cautionary approach as far as its trade relationship with its powerful neighbor to the north. Mexico sends 75 to 80% of all its exports to the United States. Only 5.5 to 6% of Mexican exports go to the European Union.
Que no leyó a Trump.
International trade expert Ignacio Martinez says a new trade pact with the EU would open the way for more automotive and pharmaceutical sales from Mexico, and it in no way contradicts Mexico's existing North American trade pact.
The current US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement sets the tone for the new commercial agreement between Mexico and the European Union. So there's not much risk that Washington will see Brussels marking a different path from Mexico in the strictly commercial part.
Experts say Mexico continues to have one of the most dynamic economies in the global south, but its future depends on its ability to fortify existing trade agreements, including the one with the European Union.
That was Frank Contreras reporting. Now, recapping today's headlines, the humanitarian crisis in the Democratic Republic of the Congo remains dire, and the UN is making a special appeal for peace in the country. Hamas is calling on the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to convene emergency sessions to address U.S. President Donald Trump's threats to relocate Palestinians from Gaza. And the first group of illegal migrants from the United States has arrived at a detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.